I would be lying if I said the first Witcher title didn't leave me wanting more. Having only been given a small glimpse of the larger world, at the end of the first game I craved more. 4 years after the initial release of The Witcher, we were graced with The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings. Serving as a direct sequel, The Witcher 2 brings a tale much larger in scope than its predecessor. Originally released for the PC in 2011, it saw an enhanced edition that was re-released on the PC and the Xbox 360 in 2012. For the purposes of this review, I played the enhanced edition on normal difficulty on PC via Steam. Before we begin the game, we are given the opportunity to load a save file from the previous title. I liked this a lot as it meant that the decisions that I had made in the first game carried over into this one, in a similar fashion to how the Mass Effect series handled its overarching decisions. For example, if you chose to side with Siegfried in The Witcher 1, he'll receive you favourably when you meet him in Loch Myon. Overall, the ability to import your data means that as the player you are even more invested in the story, because you can see the benefits or consequences of your decisions play out beyond the borders of Temeria. After having assisted to settle the issues plaguing Vizima, in addition to saving the life of King Foltest after an assassination attempt, Geralt has been enjoying a life of luxury as the monarch's personal bodyguard. At the start of the game, Geralt is restless, wanting to leave his post in favour of a life of hunting monsters, the typical lifestyle of a Witcher. King Foltest has promised Geralt anything he could ever desire within his power to grant, though he requires the Witcher's assistance one last time in an assault on the castle of the Lavalette family, who are hiding 2 children that were sired by his seed. Foltest is worried that they will eventually be used to divide the kingdom, and he's just not having that. After a rather steamy opening, you are left to explore the camp and prepare for the assault on the castle. I will caution that the game doesn't really hold your hand by providing you with instructions on how to play as you go, so if you are confused by the controls, I would suggest you start with the tutorial, which allows you to somewhat gain a feel of how the combat works. I do say somewhat, as the tutorial throws a lot of instructions at you in a short amount of time, and I felt burdened by what was happening on the screen, having to remember what buttons to press in order to execute each action. I would have preferred this system to have been organically linked into the progression of the game, in a similar style to what Horizon Zero Dawn did, but as we'll learn, in this world of witches, sorcerers, sorceresses, political discord and monsters, life was never going to be that easy. After overcoming a few obstacles, some that were entirely unexpected, King Foltest finds himself alone with Geralt as the two enter the inner sanctum of a cathedral located within the castle grounds. It's here that the king finds his 2 children, sheltering with a monk. Foltest asks Geralt for some space so he can approach his children, and it's during this time that the monk reveals himself to be a hulking human capable of extreme feats. Another Witcher. Before Geralt even has time to react, Foltest's throat is slit clean from ear to ear, the murderer escapes, and our protagonist is left standing over a rapidly increasing pool of blood as Temerian soldiers storm the sanctum. Considering the circumstances, Geralt is branded a Kingslayer, shackled, and transported to a dungeon beneath the fort's flagstones. I should mention the framing before I get too much further. If you've played Persona 5, you'll know that that game starts out as an interrogation of the protagonist, with playable flashbacks. This also happens here, with Geralt being interviewed about the events of the siege, played out as a retelling of what happened, only you experience it real time. I enjoyed this framing style as it was different from the standard start to end that many games give us. Eventually, the interrogator Vernon Roche provides Geralt the opportunity to escape the Lavalette castle. He does so, and the real story begins. Though I am disappointed that this hottie that we met along the way didn't come with us, and couldn't be romanced. Whilst this time around Geralt does mention early on that he has amnesia, much like in the previous game, it isn't a common theme this time around. I felt that in the first game this was something that other characters could have easily used to manipulate him. It seems that he's since wisened up to those machinations, as he doesn't readily divulge that information this time around. Whilst the basic narrative is the pursuit of Foltest's murderer, along the way Geralt will regain some of his lost memories, changing his motivations as he goes. He must also take part in the Northern Kingdom's political conflict in a greater scale than just Scoia'tael versus humans, with some skirmishes determining the fate of entire regions inhabited by all manner of creatures. Where in the original game you could choose one of 3 different camera displays, the only one in this title is a third person over the shoulder view. Initially, I felt that it made it difficult to see everything on a grand scale, as the camera also panned slowly when you wanted to turn it, compared to the speed it moved in the first game. However, after playing the prologue, I soon got used to it and preferred the added detail that it offered. Not only does it give you a better view of the action up close, it also allows you to feel like you're in among the chaos with Geralt, as he gingerly dances with death through every encounter he faces. Combat plays out more like an action title this time around, with only 2 types of sword attacks, light and heavy, rather than 3 different sword styles and your click 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 mouse clicks. Also, in addition to his signs, Geralt may also use traps and bombs to inhibit his foes, or just blow them to pieces. Personally, I didn't use these all that often, as I found that the signs and swordplay served my style more snugly. I did enjoy that I had the option to change things up if I wanted to though. Potions also play a major role in this game, with the swallow and cap potions being the ones I used most often. The former for health regeneration during battle, and the latter for not only seeing in dark spaces, but also for examining the opponent's cardiovascular system. Fascinating. To create potions, Geralt must first meditate, though this can be done anywhere where he isn't engaged in combat, as opposed to having to use a hearth in the first game. From the meditation menu, Geralt can create new potions and oils, or consume potions he is carrying. For me, it was a lifesaver that this could be done anywhere, especially near the end of the game where I was basically put into a 2-stage boss fight with no option to save between them. Meditating can also progress time, but this time around it's in 6-hour blocks as opposed to by the hour. I felt like this streamlined approach made managing the environment much easier, as there was less room for error in being at a certain place at a certain time, as opposed to the first game, which could be very particular, like with the warehouse in Vizima. Geralt will receive experience for slaying monsters, but the bulk of his experience gains will come from completing quests. I was surprised by how quickly I leveled up through finishing story quests, and disappointed that the level cap was 35. I reached the cap partway into chapter 3, far before I was finished completing everything. At the point that I reached level 35 and realized I was gaining no further experience, I felt that I wasn't getting anything from completing the remaining quests, and made a shoehorn for the end of the game. I would have liked the option to continue to gain levels, even if the extended experience threshold made it more difficult to level up. Just give me something to work towards. As Geralt gains levels, he will receive 1 talent point per level gained to spend in his talent tree. Initially, you are only permitted to buy talents from the training arm of the tree, but eventually the game allows you to branch out and choose your own development path. There are 3 on offer: magic, alchemy, and swordsmanship. Each tree offers Geralt a variety of benefits that change based upon your playstyle. For example, because I relied heavily on swordplay, I opted to fill out that tree and supplemented it with some talents from the magic and alchemy trees. As my Geralt leveled, and I assigned his talents, he became more sure-footed and powerful, able to shrug off back attacks and dodge successfully out of harm's way at the press of a button, though upgrading the Quen sign helped a lot too. A Witcher without his signs would be just about as useful as Dandelion without his harp. The same 5 signs carry over from the previous game, with the addition of a 6th if you max out the magic skill tree. I found early on that the Igni sign was useful for burning up enemies that were carrying a shield, and fell back on this often. However, the game wised up to this in later chapters, and this became an ineffective strategy, causing me to have to fall back on the Quen sign to prevent incoming damage. Of course, you may also use Ard to stun opponents and slice them up. It can also be used to interact with the environment, knocking down breakable walls that hinder your progress. Sadly, I didn't find much use for the other 2 signs, Erden and Axii, on my playthrough. If you use them, tell me about your experience with them in the comments. One of the things that I most enjoyed about this game was the weight that magic played within the lore. We heard that the world was full of powerful sorcerers and sorceresses in the first game, but never really met all that many. This entire game is full of them, their abilities on full display. The amount of respect and command that the sorceresses hold put to mind Final Fantasy VIII's sorceresses, a game that I enjoyed a lot. Along the journey, Geralt will experience a variety of magic effects, including a meteor shower, an enduring curse, wild storms, and of course, possibly everyone's favourite type of magic.
My favourite type of magic, lesbomancy.
the topic of intimacy, one thing that I should note is that I played the Australian version of this game. Initially I was surprised when Geralt turned down offers of sex from two women that weren't Triss, and put it down to the fact that maybe because of my playstyle he was just choosing to be monogamous. I learned later that the Australian version was censored, where it was deemed that sex as a reward wasn't appropriate. Strange, considering it was fine in the first game. Even so, the abundance of nudity that was on display in the first game is absent in this one. Women aren't commodities like a pack of tradable baseball cards. On my playthrough, the only time that there was intercourse was between Triss and Geralt, and whilst it's much more explicit than in the first game, I accepted this because it wasn't a frequent occurrence. So rather than being a mechanic of the game, it was just part and parcel of being a cisgendered male with carnal desires, and never overstayed its welcome. There is no nudity in the monsters apart from one whose presence serves a minor quest that surrounds fidelity, so I felt that this was also an acceptable application. If you do want to blow off some steam, albeit in a different fashion, the game does provide you with the opportunity to play a dice game, arm wrestle, and box. The dice game is basically the same as what we've seen before, but I felt this time around it was fairer. For starters, the more advanced opponents don't seem to ship you out of all your money because the computer decides to give them good rolls. Also, you only need to win once as opposed to the best of 3 format that the first game provided us. Oh, and you can throw dice outside of the board box, which is an automatic fold, but so can the opponent. Arm wrestling is a game not unlike fishing, where you need to keep the icon within a moving, shrinking rectangle, get it all the way to one side, and the opponent is strong-armed to the table. As for boxing, it's a quick time event which requires you to respond to button prompts that appear on the screen. I didn't mind this and thought it was hilarious to watch some of the finishes. I mean, it appears that Geralt loves stomping on the chests of other men. Scandalous. Inventory this time around is measured by weight rather than by a set number of item slots, and you can carry more than one weapon, which I liked a lot. However, if you accidentally end up carrying more than 300 pounds, you will end up walking like a geriatric unless you dump some of that excess weight. There are also some times in the narrative where you are forced to remove your equipment to proceed. You don't get a choice. Usually after these sections, it's a simple matter of just re-equipping the items that were unequipped. However, somewhere along the way my Geralt lost his shoes and spent half the game without them. I hope he happened to come across some cream for those calluses that would have formed on the soles of his feet. When exploring the cities, forests and caves of the Northern Kingdoms, you may have difficulty finding items that you are looking for. If you are using a controller, you can press R3, which makes Geralt's Witcher charm cast out an aura around him. The aura highlights any items of importance that you can interact with, making exploration much easier. I relied on this mechanism quite a lot and was incredibly grateful that it existed. The graphics are more polished this time around, and I'm glad to report that there is no unruly, constantly blowing in the non-existent wind hair. Character models have more detail to them, and the developers put a lot of consideration into their presentation, emphasizing their grittiness with dirt and body hair. Enemies can appear much larger than Geralt this time around, proving to be far more ominous than the enemies in the first game that he could have easily just booted up the backside. Whilst the environments are rich and varied, my only complaint is the light bloom technique that was used to highlight the environments. Sometimes the haze of light makes it difficult to see, and I hate that turning the camera sometimes made the light adjust as though it was pressing through a misty fog. I understand a lot of games at the time used the same technique, but can we please not? Musically, I felt the game was a masterpiece. I love that the atmosphere was perfectly encapsulated from the songs through to the ambient sounds it played throughout the various areas of Temeria. The voice acting was also very commendable, with a variety of accents differentiating the cultures to which the characters belonged. Like the first game, as you run through the various areas you can hear the characters talking about their lives and the events, as though it was a real-world lived-in location. As for my favourite track, I really love the one called Sorceresses, which whilst its own track, is woven into other themes as a leitmotif. The Wailing Woman bespeaks of the power that those that wield magic hold, and to be very wary of them, for even the most trusted could be planning something very dubious. The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings was a strong follow-up to the first Witcher title, serving us a narrative that expanded our knowledge of the nations surrounding Temeria, as well as giving us a glimpse of some of the more key players of the political stage. The improvements to the battle system and overall graphics was very welcome. I really enjoyed the plot surrounding the sorceresses, and at the end of the game once more have been left wanting more. If you have not played this game, then I would highly recommend it. Whilst the first title can be a little hit and miss, this one is definitely one that you should experience if you plan to play the third game. By the way, as we know, the Witcher series came from the books by Andrzej Sapkowski. Are there any book series that you would love to see turned into a game series? Let me know in the comments. This has been Venoir with a review of The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings for the PC. If you enjoyed my review, feel free to like and subscribe as it helps me out immensely. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Take care of yourselves, and I hope to see you again next time for my next video. Bye bye for now.